Good morning. I'd like to call to order this Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole meeting at 9:30 a.m. Okay, well, on October the 26th, 2023, to be held in, no, that's the wrong script. It's okay. And I'm going to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the territories of the Shishel and the Skohomish Nations. First, we need to adopt the agenda. Moved by Director Back, seconded by Director Lee. All those in favor? That motion carries. And our first item on the agenda is a delegation, and I'm going to look to our GM of Infrastructure Services to introduce this.
Thank you very much, Chair. With us today is Soren Parsman from ISL Engineering, and they've been working with us for several years now on the question how to increase water supply on Eastbourne for the Eastbourne water system. In previous phases, there was exploratory work done in terms of where what could be feasible sites, but there were no wells actually drilled to confirm what the potential yields would be. And last year, the board approved a budget to drill the wells, as well as a budget was approved to actually move to design a construction of a new system or an additional water supply sources. So the purpose of today's presentation by the delegation, as well as the associated board report, is to seek the direction from the board to actually continue with the design and construction of staff is recommending 2 additional sources, but that can be discussed later. So next to Søren, who is on the right side for me, on the left side for you, is Jesse Waldorf. Jesse Waldorf started with us as our assistant manager for capital projects last month, and he jumped right into the project, and he's here to help me with any questions about the project if they arise. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. There we go. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Remco. We will jump right into it, have a lot to cover here in 10 minutes as an update into our Eastbourne groundwater investigation that has been ongoing for a number of years. So as a quick background introduction, as Remco alluded to, we began in 2020 with a feasibility study look at the existing system on Eastbourne, which is essentially solely reliant on precipitation through the use of 3 shallow wells. There is 1 deeper bedrock drilled well, but the production from that is fairly low. And in that feasibility study, we did find that the system really struggled to meet demand, and that was very apparent in the last couple summers with them being in stage 4 water restrictions for a majority of the time. So a key component of that work was defining the supply deficit. So was a bit more of an abstract concept for Eastbourne, mostly because the supply equaled demand. Essentially, what water was there, residents were using. It was a really low demand compared to most water systems, especially across the SCRD. But through that work and working with staff, we defined a supply deficit of 0.3 liters per second, which again is a very low amount, but would more than double the available water available to residents in Eastbourne. So that project wrapped up with us recommending 3 exploratory drill sites, which then led to this phase of the work. So about this time last year, we started drilling. Before that, obviously working our way through the permitting and archaeological and First Nations processes to get permission. We drilled 3 locations, did pumping tests on them to calculate the sustainable yields, and then moved through conceptual engineering as well of what it might look like to tie those wells into the treatment plant. So quickly to summarize, well 2 is kind of blocked in that view there, but it's up behind the Sunshine Coast Regional District logo in a bit of park space. But 3 well locations were drilled within Ministry of Transportation right away. We drilled them to various depths ranging between 50 and 150 meters below ground into bedrock, so quite deep, deep enough to kind of remove the reliance on precipitation. And then we did pumping tests in December and January of last year and this year. Kind of a quick conceptual cross-section. So well 2 was our deepest well, also the topographically highest. Then well 3, a little bit lower, found some fractures deeper on. You can see Bonner Creek there, relatively close to well 1, is quite shallow. And then the sea level there to the far right. So generally fairly deep wells drilled into bedrock, intersecting fractures. So with the pumping tests, we calculated the sustainable yield, also looked at potential impacts to surrounding wells. The closest privately owned well to our wells we instrumented and looked at during our tests. And there are a few privately owned wells in some of the surrounding properties around Eastbourne. Also looked at potential for saltwater intrusion. So being close to the coast, there is a potential, but fairly low with our low pumping rates that we're expecting from these wells. Also looked at potential impacts to the creek, again with these wells being so deep that we're not expecting impacts to that creek. So the long-term sustainable yields calculated, well 1 was our best well at 0.2 liters per second. Wells 2 and 3 were less than that, but still, low numbers, but in the context of Eastbourne, still quite good and capable of adding water to the system. The groundwater chemistry, we were expecting arsenic. The existing well there does have arsenic in it, so that was expected, as was iron and manganese. Those are common in groundwater. Phosphorus and antimony especially were a bit new to us, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So in summary of the hydrogeological program, 3 wells combined can produce 0.43. The groundwater quality did have a few things we needed to deal with. And in general, that aquifer is far less susceptible to drought than the shallow aquifers that the system currently uses. So rolling into conceptual engineering, we looked at the connections from the wells to the treatment plant, also looked at the treatment plant itself, as well as the well infrastructure and storage options, and put together some cost estimates. The water main location's pretty standard, running along road right-of-ways, tied into one combined water main, running along the main road there down to the treatment plants. The water main is designed so that we can add wells in later on if need be once it is constructed. The well infrastructure itself, obviously we'll need pumps in the wells. Figure most of the kind of at-ground infrastructure will be pretty limited. We don't need much and can bury most of it and then connect to the existing hydro line. So the water treatment plant capacity review, again, we were expecting the arsenic, but the existing arsenic treatment doesn't have more capacity for the additional water, and there's no existing treatment for antimony or fluoride as well. The existing treatment for coliforms, iron and manganese is sufficient, but there is some upgrades needed. We did resample the wells in June just to make sure what we were seeing with the original samples was accurate, and for the most part it did confirm that. We looked at kind of multiple options for the treatment plant. We looked at blending of water, so mixing the deeper groundwater with the shallower stuff, and really there's just not enough, consistently not enough shallow groundwater to be able to do that. We looked at reverse osmosis, which can treat everything, but that produces a waste stream and also needs more water. So obviously out in Eastbourne, the waste stream would probably need to be disposed of off island and just increasing costs, and there just isn't 25% more water out there to be able to add to that system. So pre-filtration and ion exchange is what's used for arsenic. and what we figure can be used for the antimony as well. But there is a bit of piloting that the supplier recommends for that. So we looked at increasing water storage options as well. There are these kind of plastic totes out there at the moment, and we are recommending adding a few more of those just for redundancy to the water system and increasing the water storage. So to wrap it up, yeah, water mains within right-of-ways, pretty limited above ground infrastructure, and treatment plant upgrades are required. So looping it back to the supply deficit here, you can see in that black dashed line that adding well 1 alone won't meet that supply deficit of 0.3 liters per second. Adding wells 1 and 3 would, and they would exceed that target demand. Adding all 3 obviously provides system redundancy and more water to the system, but ultimately wells 1 and 3 do meet that supply deficit. And just to compare the supply with the other systems, the SCRD, these are 2011 water demands, but still accurate, I'd say. So you can see Chapman water system and Langdale up there. So Eastbourne average, what we found from 2016 to 2020 is that orange bar with well 1, it's the dark blue right next to it, and with well 1 and 3, the gray next to it. So you can see it's still a very low amount of water compared to the other systems. But yeah, again, the supply equals demand, so it's a very small system with very, very low availability of water at the moment. All right, so costs. We did kind of high-level Class C cost estimates. Still a lot of unknowns on the treatment plant side, but so for well 1 alone, we figure 1.3 million, which includes some additional storage totes, but doesn't include any buildings that might be required or a backup generator. That treatment cost might go down with some additional work if the groundwater chemistry stabilizes a little bit more. That might go down, but that was our cost estimate. So well 1 and 3, 1.5 million, and then all wells 1.8. So summarize, there's the numbers there. Again, the water mains are designed such that we can add wells to it later if we need to. Obviously, adding them later, the costs are higher than incremental costs to add them now. So work to do moving forward. Obviously, the permitting process, again, for the connections, quite a bit of provincial licensing, as well as Vancouver Coastal Health and Islands Trust as well. Kind of the high-level timelines. So this project's wrapping up. I believe staff intends to issue an RFP for the next phases before the end of the year. And then 2024, moving into detailed design, tendering, and construction in 2025. So yeah, recommendations to proceed with detailed design to connect wells 1 and 3 to the treatment plant, add the storage, and do the treatment plant upgrades. And this will provide increased system redundancy, provide Eastbourne with more water, and reduce the reliance on precipitation. Some recommendations for additional sampling and piloting of the antimony treatment. And then probably getting some data from nearby Bonner Creek sooner rather than later as well. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the great work. We also have a staff report here. I'll just see if our GM wants to speak to the staff report, and we can take questions for both. When we get to that.
Thank you. In addition to this great presentation, I think what is included in the staff report is the recommendation. We support a recommendation by the consultant for the continuation of the development of wells 1 and 3. We recognize that based on the current cost estimate, there will be an exceedance of the current budget. Current budget is 1.2 million, funded from capital reserves and community gas tax funds. So the recommendation from staff is to continuation with the detailed design, confirm what the actual budget is. If there's a budget shortfall, to come back to the board next year with a budget proposal as well as a recommendation how to fund it. And but in either way, I know that one of the major concerns from the community, one of the questions from the community is how is this going to impact our rates? And this 1.2 is not impacting the rates, and I don't expect that there will be a major impact for any further funds required as well. The only minor impacts of this project to the rates might be that there will be some additional operational cost, but however, Eastbourne is blended in with all the other regional water systems, so I think that won't be the driving force for any rate increases. I personally, and I've indicated as well to the previous board, see this as actually the Eastbourne community getting something back for the rates that they've been paying for years. Because they've been paying for years into the Chapman system, and the Chapman system is the most expensive one. So I see that actually as that they get an increased service level in return to what they've been paying for years, and the rates that they're currently paying. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stamford.
Thank you, Chair. I have just a comment. It's kind of a question, but then I have a few questions mainly around the details on this antimony and also potential saltwater ingress. You always refer to the creek as Bonner Creek, and I've asked local people, and they have no idea what that creek is. They call it Silver Creek. So, yeah, I don't know who's wrong or who's right, but they don't know where Bonner Creek is. So that caused a little bit of confusion. But mainly I want to talk about, when you look at the overall report, we're seeing not a lot of water for a large cost, and there seems to be some issues with the quality of water. And primarily around the pilot project for the antimony. Is there any other water system on the coast that has this particular issue?
Through the chair, yeah. I would say on the creek name, they are right. I double checked that before, and that's what it's called in various literature I've seen on there, but happy to change that to cause any or ease any confusion. I don't know off the top of my head if other systems have treatment for antimony. It would depend. It's in bedrock commonly enough, so if there's any systems that are pulling from that, they would require that treatment. So yeah, it's kind of something we'll need to look at in detailed design and work with the suppliers to pilot that treatment and make sure it works. Yeah, it is common with arsenic, but just at these levels that again did tend to bounce around a little bit when we sampled it, because we took multiple samples when we were testing it, and then the one in June as well. So yeah, we just kind of want a bit of a clearer picture on that. But it is elevated more than it usually is.
And then the other issue I'm looking at is saltwater ingress. I mean, the diagram, I'm not sure how accurate that diagram is, but it does show a point where you could expect some ingress. Does that get worse as time goes on? Or does the possibility of saltwater ingress increase as the usage of the well increase? Are we relying too much on the one well then? I mean, there's still a lot of questions. I appreciate that it was staff mentioning how much the community has already put into their system in general as part of the Chapman ratepayers. But this is a long-term response for the community. They do tend to consider this is how they live their lives as recreational owners, is having low water in the summers. But I think the concern is that it's continuing to get lower and lower. And there's going to be a point where 5 years down the line where they won't have enough, even with their conservation. So these are sort of trying to put the long-term picture in order to understand how that community is moving forward. And then additionally, there is a good indication that this community will become more full-time. The Connected Coast is coming to that part of Keats, and it will make living there full-time more feasible. So that could change the dynamics of that community. So, thanks.
Yeah, I can respond to the saltwater thing through the chair. Yeah.
A little bit more in the mic.
Okay, closer. Yeah, good question on the seawater intrusion. So the diagram I showed is just kind of a conceptual diagram. It's not specific to there, but generally with these fractures in bedrock, ultimately some of them will clearly make its way to the ocean and be connected to saltwater. But the function of if saltwater intrusion happens is pretty well dependent on the pumping rate. So if you over pump things, you're going to be sucking that saltwater in. And once it's in, it's in, unfortunately. So it is a balance. And again, these rates are really low that we are proposing. So we don't expect them to be influencing that saltwater in. That drilled well that's been out there in use for a number of years hasn't shown any indication of that. We will be pumping closer to how it was pumped earlier in its life. So yeah, it's mapped as a medium risk, I think, based on the provincial mapping. Medium to low, some areas around it are low, but yeah, obviously more wells is more redundancy. Well 1 is the best well, is closest to the coast, and then well 3 is further inland, so it would be a lower risk there too. So definitely some redundancy in the systems recommended for that.
Go ahead, Jim.
In addition to, thank you, Chair. In addition to the response from our consultant, one of the steps that needs to be taken is the application for a water license for these new wells. And as part of that process, there's actually a section in the Water Sustainability Act that prohibits water license to be issued that could result in saltwater intrusion. So it's something that actually on a regulatory level is not allowed, because it's you're drawing then salt water into freshwater aquifers. So that's something that will be closely looked at in that process, part of that process as well. And I concur with the response provided by the consultant that the flows are most likely so low that it's totally not a risk. But that will need to be confirmed and assessed also by the regulators. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, I wish I had a time machine to go back to the 1990s and find out why this was put into the regional water service, because the whole point of the regional district service system is that users only pay for the costs of the service that they're in. And in this case, and staff could confirm this, not only are they paying into the regional system, but I assume we don't have any separate accounting. So we actually can't pull statements showing what it costs to run the Eastburn system and whether they've been paying in excessively or not. Are they paying the same both taxes and utility fees that everybody on the regional water service is paying? So I have a sewer system with 11 users, and they're responsible for their costs, and it's very clear. It's well outlined. So this is a crazy sort of a situation. Average day demand. So how is that calculated? I mean, given that these are summer cottages and people are not here 80% of the year, the average would be kind of low. Like, how did you come up with that number?
Through the chair, yeah, good question. It's average, right? So it is averaged out over the year. We tried to factor in some of the summer use. But yeah, there is some questions surrounding the seasonality of the use for sure. But ultimately, whatever the demand was, we found it was equal to what we figured the wells could provide from the supply. And anecdotally, from the operators out there, that's kind of how it goes too, especially in the summer, that as quickly as these tanks are filled, they're being being used. So, yeah, that demand part of the equation was tougher than it usually is to figure out for sure.
Director Bax.
Yeah, I see that it says that there's 170 properties, and so I'm averaging, I guess, probably 350 people in this system. And I was wondering if what type of storage system that these individuals have on their properties, whether or not they have the 7,500 liter totes rain collection system, and whether or not a rain collection system rather than a well system might be better suited to this location due to the constraints, the costs, the antimony and the fluoride and all that. Would it be, I mean, how many totes can we get for $1.8 million? Can we explore that possibility of creating a rainwater system for these users, giving them maybe a subsidy to help them create rainwater systems for their own properties so that they may become more self-sufficient?
Is that the
I can
staff
start.
want to take that on, or do you? Or-
Thank you. Given that this Eastbourne system is part of the regional water system, they're eligible to apply for a rainwater harvesting system rebate program. Most properties on Eastbourne have tanks. They differ in size based on what the property owner needs, would like to have filled if the water is available. But we're, as an SRD, we're not able, we're supporting rainwater harvesting, but we're not able to force people to install them on their property. We provide the rebates, and that's as far as we can go at the moment. It's, from a staff perspective, it's primarily a question of the current demand is low. We know that the population, and there's a big flux in summer and winter population. I'm talking about the summer population. Winter population, that's fine with the current demand. That's maybe 50 properties where people are living, that's fine. It's a summer population where it can really jump into several hundreds. That is really the issue. At that time, when there is currently rationing, we don't have any backup. The only backup is get a barge, get a bunch of tanks, and do the back and forth between Langdale and Eastbourne Dock, and have the residents go to the dock and get water, or we get a pumper truck there and pump it into the system and jerry rig something up. But that's our backup plan for Eastbourne. So there is currently no redundancy at all. The addition of well 1 and 2 would at least provide a backup for if long-term, for example, due to climate change, the shallower well that's currently in place would run dry. At least we have 2 wells in the deeper aquifer, less susceptible to climate change impacts, that can continue to provide water to the community.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question was partially answered. Typically in an aquifer, you're using water that's like 3 to 10 years old, but it strikes me, and I might have it wrong, but I believe that we're probably using water that's 1 year old here because of the size of the watershed. So if that is true, and we're getting less rainfall each year, we're going to have to monitor how deep the aquifer is and stop using water after it gets a certain drop so that it doesn't get salt water. So my question, a long way of asking, is this thing going to get less productive as we go along each year?
Through the chair, yeah. So the shallower wells are essentially rainwater collection wells. The 3 shallow wells they use run dry in the summer as the rains stop. So those are essentially like, yeah, days to weeks long groundwater age. The bedrock aquifer that we put these wells in yeah, 10 plus years, I would imagine. We haven't looked at it too closely. It takes a long time for it to flow through those bedrock fractures. And no doubt it is recharged from the topographic highs on the island and percolates through and gets to these wells. So is it completely disconnected from precipitation? No. Very few aquifer systems are. But that lag time is such that it is protected a bit from, these drought cycles, which are clearly getting longer and worse, but it does protect a little bit from that just with the storage in the aquifer itself. So yeah, they can't be overpumped. The sustainable yields we calculate are based on a 20-year time frame. And we try and, incorporate recharge and those kind of things into it. But those numbers are calculated to try and protect from overpumping and running these wells dry.
Thank you. So it's an average, and we're going to have lots of warning if it happens. So thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, this is a question for staff, and you may not have the answer today, but we have a similar problem with the recreation facilities, that they all got lumped into one pot, and we cannot pull out the statistics to find what it costs to run each facility. So staff are not now working on actually doing that, coding the expenses so that we can get a report on each facility. Would it be possible to do that for Eastbourne so that we could have a transparent accounting to the residents and everybody else as to how much money goes in and how much money comes out and what it costs to operate the system?
Staff.
Thank you. I can look into what we can do with our current data, and I can connect with the appropriate divisions to see if we can change our accounting system so that it is more clear moving forward.
Director Stamford.
A follow-up to Director Back's question about rainwater collection on the Eastbourne area, and then I've got a few more comments. The lots are incredibly small. Everyone does have a storage tank of different size, and they do it based on their own particular needs. This population is particularly aware of their water consumption. Even before they were on the system, they get together as neighborhoods and have a competition who can use the least water. So they are using everything they have available, recognizing that they have a limited resource. And there's days they don't get water. So that's how they operate. And yes, they're a recreational population, but I would suggest it wasn't an 80% non-usage. It's closer to they are there 40 to 50% of the time, rather than they're not. It's more than 2 months out of the year. Another comparison is a question that I actually have is: has there been any conversation with the other side of the island? DL 696 is putting in wells that covers a similar population for a similar type of usage, but it also has the addition of the 300 plus weekly Keats Camp access. They seem to not have the same issues with water as Eastbourne does. And I'm just wondering what conversations there's been, or a study for the whole of the island. I think that's also a responsibility of Islands Trust. They are coming in with a water recharge report soon, like 3 months ago. And I'm hoping that will better inform the long-term water impacts for this particular island.
Through the chair, yeah, we did receive Islands Trust's draft recharge map that we incorporated into this, and yeah, as soon as we get that report, happy to go through it and apply it to our work as well. It wasn't in our scope to kind of look at an island scale kind of study, but obviously anecdotally, like through working with Keats Island Construction on it, they're well aware of everything that's going on the island. The drillers we used put in a well for the camp as well when they were out there. So we definitely know that side of the island has more water, but no, we didn't look into the feasibility of sharing resources that way.
Thank you, Chair. Several years ago, staff reached out to the other major players on the island, and at that time, there was no real interest to share water sources.
Director Bax.
Just to follow up on a conversation I started earlier about water storage, is there any idea or thought behind creating a rainwater storage system for that system, like the SCRD? I mean, other communities have built water towers. They've got storage things, and really, if we throw together a whole lot of totes, can we supplement the system for a better bang for buck? It's a very expensive ask, and I know it's going to be spread out over the entire community that uses the Chapman system, but still, it's an awful lot of money to spend for a system that still has its drawbacks and has no guarantee that it's going to continue to function in a proper manner over the coming years. So I was wondering if there's any thought put to storage, because we still get rain, we just can't always predict when it comes.
Through the chair, yeah, we looked at storage more as part of the 2020 feasibility study, and providing more water from storage alone, and the amount of storage needed was a lot of totes. I forget the exact number, but a lot. As part of detailed design, for sure, we can work with adding more totes in the space we have available. Yeah, right now I think we added 3 in the cost. For a while we were looking at kind of 6, 7, 8, and increasing that number to, have more raw water storage. Ultimately, it doesn't get you fully away from running out of water in the summer when it's needed the most, when we don't have it. So, to get the amount of water stored in the fall, winter, spring to provide it all in the summer would take a lot of storage. So I don't think it fully removes the need for a backup water supply that isn't as reliant on precipitation, but it's definitely something that needs to be done in detailed design, is just how much more storage can we feasibly add, for sure.
Yeah, I think it may.
Director Bax.
Follow up.
Okay.
I'm just thinking that it may augment the system for a lower cost.
Director Stanford.
Just a quick response to Director Bax, but also I'm hoping that I can move the recommendation. There is a very small amount of space available for the level of water storage that's required. That's private land all the way through this, and the lots are generally smaller than a city lot. So it's very limited in what they can store. And I'm hoping that we're ready to move the recommendation forward, and I'm recommending.
Could I just first suggest that we get a motion to receive all reports in this agenda?
Okay.
Moved by Director Inkster, seconded by Director Bax. All those in favor? That motion carries. And then we're looking at just the second recommendation here. Thank you, Director Stamford. Is there a seconder for that?
Yep.
Is there a seconder? Moved, seconded by Director McMahon. Any discussion? Oh, go ahead, Director Stamford.
I recognize that this just isn't sitting well. It's difficult. We're coming into this halfway through the decision process. It's not everything that we would want in a water system. I just believe that staff have done due diligence in trying to find alternatives for this particular area. It's challenging. I think this community does deserve a water system with some redundancy in it and some ability to have assurance that they will be able to get through the summer 3 to 5 years from now. So I'm putting the recommendation forward.
Thank you. Director Lee.
I was just looking for a little clarity. I believe, is the motion on the floor to accept the recommendations on page 16? Is that what I'm hearing?
We've already passed the first recommendation because all reports have been received.
Yes.
And it's the second
So
recommendation.
it's recommendation 2 that's on the floor. Okay, thank you. My comments are is that a lot of properties in Area F pay a lot of taxes that they get very little benefit from. So perhaps this is evening it up a little bit. So anyways, those are my comments.
Director McMahon.
Whoops. I'm reluctantly supportive of this, but my concern is that we're getting all these capital projects coming to us basically on a break-fix basis because Eastbourne needs a solution now. They're running out of water. And this is coming to us ahead of our asset management plans and ahead of our service level decisions. So we're going around doing this all backwards, and it worries me. But I don't really see very many options right here, right now. Thanks.
Any more discussion on the motion? Director Inkster.
Yeah, this is difficult going forward because of the amount of water that will come out of those wells. And it's a tough decision, the amount of money being spent for the amount of water. But the way I look to support it is if we had a sub-neighborhood in Seashelt that needed water all of a sudden, because it's quite a large community and the regional district was the provider, and they put forward a project and a plan, I would have to support that in order to provide my community with guaranteed flows of water. So that's why I'll be supporting it.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the table, which is the second recommendation on page 16. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? That motion carries with Director Bax opposed.
May I state why I opposed it?
No, you have to do it before we vote. Sorry. Yeah, we get that. Okay, do you want that vote recorded? I think it should be by default. That's why I said Director Bax opposed, yeah. So now we're on to item 3, unless there are any other questions on this report matter? No, okay. Hopkins Landing Waterworks District Feasibility Service Area. We have Manager Walkie here.
Thank you, Chair. Assistant Manager O'Rourke was unable to make this meeting today, so he asked if I could present this, and I'd be more than happy because it's a good news report. I like these type of reports. This is the Hopkins Landing Waterworks District Feasibility Service Area, and there's a few recommendations, and it talks about a feasibility service area, accepting an infrastructure planning grant, and also a feasibility studies Area A budget. In February, Hopkins Landing Waterworks District requested that the SCRD take over their water system. On May 11th, a report was presented to the board recommending that we apply for a grant. And on September 27th, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs awarded us the $10,000 grant, which is great news. So phase 1 of this project is the infrastructure assessment. And we will, if the board approves these recommendations today, we will approach the Hopkins Landing Improvement District, our Waterwork District, and receive a deposit from them for their portion of this work. And we will continue on with doing feasibility, and out of that will become options and recommendations that we will bring back to the board for further review. If at that time the board chooses to continue down this path, we'll do more work. We'll do asset management planning, engage with the local community, and do detailed final reviews. Part of this project is it needs to be included in a feasibility service area. So as we all know, the regional district works in service areas, and as the Hopkins Landing isn't part of a service area, we need to have an area for the money to go in and out. You can't put it in and out of a service area it's not part of. And so that's why we use feasibility service areas, so that there's a place, there's like a piggy bank basically, that isn't in a current service area for the money to go in and out. And that's what the feasibility service area is, 155. The timeline for the next step says we need to sign the grant agreement. We need to work with the Hopkins Landing Water District to get their deposit, and then we will be issuing an RFP for engineering to do the condition assessment. At the end of page 23, I believe it is, I noticed there's a bit of an error with timelines, so I'll just talk about that. We expect to get this RFP out soon and do the condition assessment early next year, Q1. And then we would bring it back to the board after we complete that. So, maybe next Q2 kind of thing. And then if we were to continue on with phase 3, that would be sort of Q3, Q4 next year. I would assume we'd be coming back to the board at the end of next year with, hey, here it all is. Are we really going to do this? And then in what year is that now, 2025, early 2025, we would start the process of actually taking over the system, which can sometimes take a while. I can't say exactly how, but 6 months, year kind of thing. So that would be the end of 2025 that this could be all completed, I would assume. Thank you. I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
You anticipated my question about timelines, because I couldn't see how this could possibly get into the 2024 budget process. In the meantime, my general impression is that the system is hanging together with duct tape and chewing gum. So is the improvement district continuing to maintain their water system, or how is this working?
Currently, right now, they're responsible for their water system, so I'm assuming they're maintaining it how they normally would. I agree that the infrastructure seems very old and aged, and they probably just go and repair it. I don't see any indication of capital replacements going on right now. Sorry, through the chair.
Director Stanford.
Yes, maybe in response to the maintenance question, I keep close eyes on their Facebook page, and we did not get water this morning. Seems to be a comment that comes up at least once every 2 weeks. So I know they're having issues, and it is very concerning to think that, again, it's a very tight community, not a lot of properties, or not a lot of space in the properties, and it looks expensive. So, but that's something that we have to look at the details later on. My question I have is about this 155 function. When I looked it up, I noticed that Area F is the only one that actually has money in it. There's like $9,500 in there. I'm just wondering what that money was for, if it was for this particular thing, or was there another project that money was put aside for?
Thank you for the question. I see that our CFO is in attendance as well, so instead of me trying to do something, I will hand it over to the expert.
Go to the CFO.
Thank you, Chair. That is actually for the connected coast portion of the feasibility.
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just curious about the service area. Are we going to establish a temporary service area to run the costs through and figure out the cost for everybody and then incorporate it into the regional service area, or how's that going to work?
CFO.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So when we consider taking over a new water service, we have to first step do a feasibility study. And once that's done, we'll bring forward some consideration and options to the board as far as how we would possibly take over this particular system and how we would recover for the function. There would be several options, one being incorporating it into the regional water system, but some of those may require some legislative processes. So in order for us to do that, we, per the Local Government Act, we have to set up a feasibility service, include those costs, recover the cost from the areas that benefit from it. And then once the service establishment is determined, then we will repatriate and recover those funds over to the new established service arrangement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are 4 recommendations on page 21 that we have not yet put forward. I see Director Stamford.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendations 2, 3, 4, and 5 on page 21 of the report.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Lee. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Manager. Now we are on to item 4, which is Annex D of the agenda, pages 28 to 30. And this is on the Eastlink contract renewal. And we have our Manager of Information Technology and GIS here. Go ahead.
Good morning. This is a request to approve the renewal of our Eastlink Wide Area Network contract for a further 3 years. We've relied on Eastlink services since 2007 to interconnect our multiple SCRD facilities on the coast and to provide access to the internet. There are no other providers that currently connect to all of our facilities and that provide the flexible dark fiber services that we have now. Our current 3-year contract expires in February 2024. However, staff recommend that we renew the 3-year contract now, and this is because staff have negotiated an increase to the internet speed from 300 megabits per second to a gigabit per second. This would improve the response time for our new work from anywhere service needs and reduce latency and improve productivity. The new contract would continue at the same $6,404 per month for a total contract value of $230,542 before GST over the 3 years, including the increased internet bandwidth.
Thank you. Any questions? Director McMahon.
In fact, I don't have any questions because this was very straightforward, so I'm happy to move the recommendations on page 28.
Seconded by Director Toth. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? That motion carries. Thank you very much, Manager. And now we're on item 5, which is the routine report on contracts between $50,000 and $100,000, which is Annex E, pages 31 to 32. Are there any questions from directors on this report? Does someone want to put forward the, well, actually, I guess we've received it already. So next item, director's constituency expenses. Are there any questions on this, Annex F, pages 33 to 34? Seeing none, we need a motion to go in camera, and then we'll have a 5-minute break as we do so. Moved by Director Gabius, seconded Director McMahon. All those in favor? Going in camera. Thanks. Thank you. And now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Director Toth, seconded Director McMahon. All those in favor? The motion carries.